Hello. Are you there?
Gigi, how are you?
Good. Is my voice coming through okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because at first it sounded like it had a little bit of an echo. And so I'm glad we are finally here. Let me just do a quick introduction if you don't mind. My name is Katie. I'm a realtor, author, and host of About the Book segment where I interview authors on radio at 101.1 FM here in Birmingham, Alabama. And I also do Zoom interviews with those authors as well. And today, and this has been a long time coming, we've been trying to. Gigi was sick last week when we were supposed to do this, and so it's been several weeks since we're trying to get here. But anyway, the author today is Gigi Langer, and she is author of the book How to Worry Less Now. And can't we all use that information right there? So let me tell you a little bit about Gigi. Gigi, she holds a PhD in psychological studies and education and a master's in psychology, both from Stanford University. During her years at Eastern Michigan University, she won several awards for her teaching, and as is it Georgia Langner wrote 4 books for education. Gigi is a sought-after speaker who has helped thousands of people improve their lives at home and at work. As a person in recovery, Gigi hasn't had a drug or drink for 30 years, although she does occasionally overindulge in Ghirardelli chocolate and historical novels. She lives happily in Michigan with her husband Peter and her car Murphy. You even have a name for your car.
Oh, it's a cat. It must be a typo.
Okay, you know what? That's my bad. It is a cat. Okay. Every time I read that, I read car. It's like that, and her cat Murphy. So excuse me for that, people. That is my bad. She has a cat. How are you today, Gigi?
I am great. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I know. It's been a really long time coming. Let me get all my stuff together here. So let's talk about this bio for a minute, because I know, in the book you talk about your recovery and, your struggles with alcohol and all that. So is that what led you to this book?
I think for sure, because when I quit drinking, which had a rather dramatic lead up, which is described in the book.
I bet.
Multiple divorces, multiple problems. But when I finally did stop drinking, I realized that I still had a thinking problem. I still worried. I still was negative toward myself. I still had doubts and lacked confidence. And, I had a lot of baggage from the past.
Right.
So that was all. I talk in the book about the whispered lies. That was all.
Oh, we're going to talk about that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this, this is baggage that you carried over with you. Okay. Yeah. And so I do want to let everybody know I've read the book. I've thoroughly enjoyed the book. And I want to say, I really hate it when books talk to me the way that this book talked to me. Like, get your act together.
Uh-huh.
Come on, girl, you can do it. Because to some degree, we're all warriors, okay? But this right here, your book talks about worrying to the nth degree, where it just overtakes you. You just worry about everything, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's
okay.
It's we call it, in a way, you're obsessing about the past. So we're worried about what we did in the past. Of course we can't change it. And then we're living in the wreckage of our future, because we're projecting into the future all these things that could happen and might happen and how we'd fix them. And so we miss being in the very present moment, even, in our relationships, so that we get tense when we worry and we have negative thoughts, and then we're not available for life.
That's right. That's right. So I want to, because all this stuff is stuff that goes on in your head mostly.
Yep.
Not that anybody's telling you this. It's just stuff that's going on in your head. And so in your book, you call them whispered lies.
Right.
Yeah. So is that something, did that just hit you? Were you actually, when you came up with this whispered lies, because I'm just thinking in my head, did that all of a sudden hit you while you were thinking about something that wasn't true?
Yeah, the term whispered lies, it just kind of came to me, but it represents the fact that, you know, I had a lot of therapy. I had a lot of wonderful spiritual advisors. I've had, you know, I've done a lot of work over the years to discover all these 50 ways of worrying less thou that are in the book. But when we have a negative thought, the first part is just being aware that there's a little negativity, and that comes from our baggage quite often. You know, the parents who made you think maybe you weren't worthy of love, or an old boyfriend who said negative things to you that you started internalizing, you know, or a teacher that made you feel stupid, you know. So then those get internalized and they whisper, oh, I can't do this, I'm not very smart. You know, that's like a whispered lie.
Yeah. So, you know, and talk about that, you know, and we talked about, I'm pretty off the cuff because really, you know, I've highlighted some stuff in the book, but mostly our interview is driven by our conversation. So I want to talk on that a little bit about how people talk to you and how that, you know, gets implanted in your brain. And so you start thinking these things by yourself. But is there a certain type of person that lets this happen to them? I mean, it doesn't have to everybody. Are you, you know, predestined or predetermined to be susceptible to this?
Yeah. Well, you know, you're right. I was thinking about that because, you know, certainly people who are in a high stress job or doing something for the first time that you've never done, you know, if you have a really healthy self-esteem and you grew up in a supportive environment, you have supportive people around you, you're less likely to have those doubts that become crippling. But people who grew up in dysfunctional families where, you know, how can you be so dumb? And, you know, they heard a lot of negative messages, or, you know, they had a sister or brother who was highly competent and they always compared themselves. There's all kinds of, you know, alcoholism in the family,
Right.
Obviously. So there are all kinds of things that can kind of give people a little, I don't know, install kind of negative messages. And certainly, you know, when you said, was it not genetic, but there is a highly sensitive person category. And there's actually a fabulous woman who's researched people who sense other people's feelings more. And the highly sensitive person then, I think, is more prone to stress because tend to be a little more tuned into what people are thinking. There's a whole thing about highly sensitive people and some books written about it and so on, but they're more sensing and more sensitive actually. So a little more worry goes on there, you know. And certainly if you have a loved one, either a child or a husband or a wife who's dysfunctioning, that is a huge source of worry for people. And so, you know, I talk about that in my book because I married a man who was clean and sober, and after 30 years he started having some drinks and it scared me silly. So every single situation in here is something from my own life. These are all techniques I've used when I've hit situations that were rough. And
you know, but in reading this book, you know, and we're going to talk about some of those situations, but I kept thinking, because it's real, I won't say that it's oversimplified, but these techniques you talk about, they seem rather doable. They seem rather doable. And backtracking just a little bit about, you know, there being tons of books on highly sensitive people. I've read them because I'm probably a highly sensitive person.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you know, so I'm probably a highly sensitive person. But moving on here a little bit. So one of the causes of stress that you talk about here is when life isn't working is usually because we're trying to force things to go our way, as opposed to what?
That's a really great question, because it seems like up until somewhere in our 30s, 40s, you know, it's A plus B equals C. I do good work in school, I get an A. I'm in control, right? And then we start entering into relationships and romance. And all of a sudden, we can't control the other person and we can't control the outcomes. We get into work situations where we don't have total control. And to our best efforts, things don't work out the way we want them to. So if we are totally hooked on getting things to happen our way, we are in for a world of worry and unhappiness. So
if we don't curb it.
Pardon?
If we don't curb it. So in some kind of way.
Yeah. So how do we sort of get over needing to control everything? That is the key. And there's a lot of that in the book. Part of it I do discuss spiritual principles in the book. And I also use the cognitive behavioral therapy ideas, and also some energy things like the tapping. All of these can help change a negative thought that I have to have it this way or else I won't be happy. Like if my child doesn't stop drinking, I cannot be happy. Well, there are whole programs that help you be fairly sane and functional even while a loved one is dysfunctioning.
That's true. That's true.
Because you cannot control that. So I think so many of the frustrations in life is when we run into things we can't control that we wish we could. And then we're back to, what can we control? My attitude. How do I get myself settled into my own strength or spiritual strength that is going to help me get calm enough so I can access some wisdom and not force solutions, to be patient, to listen.
Right. Yeah, like kind of, what is the saying, trying to put a round peg into a square or something like that?
Yeah.
That reminds me of that. Yeah. And so, and we're going to talk, well, let's talk about now, because there are some things that you can do, some ways that you can control that thinking or redirect that pattern of thought to, curb that behavior of being, number one, being so disappointed when you don't get your way and when you really don't have a control over a situation. So, what are some of those techniques to do that?
What are some of the best ways to do that?
Yeah, what are some of the best ways to do that?
Yeah. Well, I have 50 of them in my book, but
well, let's talk about a few of them.
You might ask that. If, the most obvious one is meditation. The research on meditation in terms of lowering stress and also improving all of the physical health things and emotional health is just rock solid. And there are wonderful little tools online that can help you learn how. It doesn't mean just sitting silently. You can use guided meditations. And quite often early on when I first realized I had such a bad self-image, I actually used like an almost self-hypnosis meditation that said, I'm likable, I'm confident. So those things, even though they might seem hokey like affirmations, when we say to ourselves something negative, it's more likely to draw the negativity into our lives. When we say to ourselves positive things like, I'm going to love this interview with Sharita, we're going to have a great time, it's going to be of service to people, that is a much more forceful and dissolving of the worry kind of thought than, oh my God, I don't know if it, and so on.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. On a couple of levels, a lot of people that I interview, it just reminds me of this self-talk that you have. One of the first books that I was a co-author on, I Am Woman, my chapter was about my battle with depression. Okay, and I always say that for me, depression was, my cause of depression was all the terrible things I told myself about myself. And then one day I was sitting and I was telling myself all those terrible things, and all of a sudden I'm asking myself, where did you get this stuff from? Who told you that?
Yeah.
And it was in that very instant, the depression was gone.
Amazing. Yes.
It was just gone. Yeah. So I can relate to that. Those whispered lies and positive self-talk. I don't know about affirmations because I've been doing some experiments with affirmations. Not necessarily my own, but some have gotten offline, and a lot of them, they really didn't fit me. So we have to come up with our own affirmations.
Absolutely. Yep. I agree. I didn't know that I could write a book like this. After 30 some years, my husband said, why don't you, instead of writing a memoir, because I had retired and I like to write, he said, why don't you write down all the things that I hear you tell the women that you work with? And I thought, oh my gosh, a self-help book, you know. Well, then of course the whispered lies came in. What do you mean? Who do you think you are? Blah, blah, blah. So I did create vision boards with a completed book, and I created a little saying, you know, I create a wonderful book in a wonderful way. I offer wonderful service for wonderful pay.
And you do.
Yeah, and I had that, you know, the vision board in front of my desk every time I went to write. And it took 6 years before I had the manuscript that was ready to go. So, you know, as you're writing a book, as you know, isn't easy. And it
Yeah, right. It is not. It's not. So and you have something here, and I really thought was funny. The committee in my head. Okay. It's a whole committee. Okay.
Yeah.
It says committee in my head, for instance, the belief if I want to be liked, I must look good. Okay. And so you tapped on being likable, you know, just a moment ago, and what was running through my head. So for a person who feels like they aren't likable, okay, and I feel like I've had this conversation with somebody before about being likable and, you know, discovering, you know, why that person might not be likable, and then wanting to change that in some kind of way. We talked about this at length. It seemed like there was no conclusion, because my perspective was, well, if you're not likable, are you wanting to change because you're not likable, or are you wanting to change because you want to change? So I'm saying here, you know, there's, you know, I guess there's got to be something about yourself that you don't like in your book that you want to change, okay? But with relation to other people, having some effect on why you're changing. Do you understand what I'm saying? Are you changing for other people?
Exactly. And, you know, one of the reasons I wrote the book also was because being in 12-step programs, it's not just a book for people in recovery and so on, but there are so many great tools in 12-step programs that are helpful. And so examining, you know, what we tell ourselves and the language we use with ourselves is one of the keys of recovery. And you were talking about the self-talk and the negativity and the people pleasing.
Yes.
Which is, you know, a lot of people who grow up in families or whatever, they just don't quite realize that they can be lovable in and of themselves for the essence of who they are. And one of the key things in the book is that there is an essence of goodness inside each of us, whether we think of it as a spiritual center or a self, but a higher self. And I refer to a positive power or a loving power. And that's the source of our goodness and our love. It's not from outside.
That's right. That's right. I believe that, you know, again, I was interviewing in all of my first interviews that I did. It was a pastor here locally, and he was talking about, you know, his stepfather, how he talked to him, how he treated him, you know, really, really, really badly. So he was saying, well, you know, all this stuff that he had told me is what I had become. And my question was did you really become that? Did you really become that? And his answer was, you know, no, I didn't. That's not even who I was.
Exactly. So many of us lose ourselves because we think we have to pretend. You know, many people have created an invented self that we present to others, and sitting inside this shell, lonely as heck, because very few people can we share with honestly how we feel. And that's a really tough place to be. So to realize and be able to contact, I think that's one of the reasons meditation helps us. It takes away all the distractions, and prayer too. And it connects us with a center of power from which we can operate. And then the wisdom comes for example, how to deal with a tough situation with a child. You know, it isn't purely a cognitive intellectual enterprise. You know,
that's correct. That's correct. Number one, for me, wisdom only comes from one place. Okay, it's not anything I'm born with. It doesn't even come with age, as far as I'm concerned. I've learned it. Okay, but age is not the source of wisdom in my book. Okay?
Right.
Yeah. So you're saying here you can find peace of mind under any circumstances because you're in charge of what you think about.
Yep.
That's so
So
powerful.
yes, it is. And I think, just like you had that moment of awareness when you said, whoa, look how I'm talking to myself. That was a gift to have that moment of awareness. And it can be learned. It can be pointed out. Oh my gosh, listen to some of the things you're saying to yourself, write them down. And I have an exercise in the program, in the book, where it says, here's a common negative belief. Like, if I don't work 70 hours a week, I'll get fired. Okay, so what are the consequences? Well, I'm not home with my family. My relationships are shot. I'm exhausted and stressed. And then we look at the whispered lie underneath that, which is, I must prove that I'm Superman at work,
Right.
in order to keep my job. So that's a twisted sense. And then when we can get in contact with the truth of who we are, we don't have to pretend the source, and we can relax a little and come into our spiritual and personal power. Then we can catch those thoughts, notice them. Oh, there I am telling myself I've got to overwork again. Well, let's just work with that for a minute, because I'm scaring myself with my thoughts. I'm going to lose my job if I don't work. Now, is that thought really true? It's really
Scaring myself about thoughts. That's it sounds funny, but that's what happens.
Yeah.
That and just because I've had my share of dealing with this has been 15, 20 years ago or so, and just for anxiety, I had it bad. I had it really bad. I would just freak out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we all are prone to it. The question is, what do we do when we notice it? And the worst thing we can do is dull ourselves out with too much TV, too much drinking, too much romance, too much, bar, too much party, because then we never have a chance to get in touch with what's really going on with us.
That's right. That's right. And I guess for me, when talking about that anticipatory anxiety, I don't even know how I got to this point where I begin to say, well, what if that doesn't happen?
Oh yeah, there you go.
For a very long time, I worked myself into this tizzy. I don't know, it was a year or two or whatever, and then suddenly, what if it doesn't happen? Because nothing ever does. I mean, it never does.
Yeah. It's interesting that when we challenge these thoughts that we've sort of inherited or created that make us tense, and then we challenge them and we say, wait a minute, is that really true? That I can't be loved unless I have my hair perfect and my all these whispered lies. No, it's not. But some people grow up with them.
Right. And then I guess, and just to, backtrack on what you were talking about, when you finally realize all this and let it go, it's a tremendous sense of relief, and probably more like a new self-love of some sort.
Exactly. Yeah, because the channel's clear. I talk about how, we can receive and give love if we're more of an open channel. But what clogs up the channel is worry and fear and doubt and negative thinking and self-limiting thinking and victim thinking. And that kind of locks us up in terms of our potential. So, if there's a dream that a person wants to realize, it's going to be hard to go forward unless some of those little limiting beliefs get looked at and challenged.
Right, and challenged. So because when we're talking about this now, I've got this next point. Most of our worries are fueled by false stories installed into our minds long ago, just waiting for opportunities to be confirmed. But it's funny. It says what opportunities to be confirmed, and they're all self-confirmed because nobody, once you grow up. I don't know if you grow up in a household where your parents or your siblings have taunted you in some sort of way, and when you grow up, some of that taunting may go away. So this confirmation again is from our own thoughts.
Yeah, but you're bringing up a good thing, because There's a lot of neuroscience also, you know, there's a combination of traditions that I'm drawing on, but the neuroscience is that, you know, our brains get grooved into thinking patterns, and they were installed in a way when we were little. You know, one of the things was if I made a mistake, my dad would say, Gigi, how can you be so dumb? And so that groove was in there. So whenever I made a mistake, I was really hard on myself. And we can reprogram the grooves because the brain is so, what they call plastic. It can be remolded, but it takes conscious effort to reframe our old thoughts. So when I make a mistake, and I've had to make a lot of them with all the technology and everything I've had to learn,
Right.
you know, it's like, okay, we'll figure this out. Let's get up and take a break. It's all right.
Well, let's talk about a little bit about you know, someone who may read this book, and I hope when this interview is posted that people will, you know, will watch it and want to go out and buy it or either order it. Those people who, you know, they read this book, they have the sense that they can do this, but it's challenging. It's very challenging. And so to a person who worries a lot, apparently would not be a person that welcomes challenges, you know. So, and so they may make some of these attempts that are short-lived. You know,
So
if they're, you know, they may make some attempt to, you know, implement some of these things that you talk about, okay, and they get a little bit into it, and it's helping. Then they get discouraged because it's taken so long. So I guess what I want to talk about here is that, you know, the process itself. I mean, I know it can be different for everybody, but when it doesn't happen quickly enough, and those little thoughts start creeping back in, I mean, how do you know? And I didn't finish the book. I got a lot of ways in the book. But what do you do to the whole book is about combating these thoughts, okay? But it's hard.
Yeah. So there are two things I talk about in there. One, that this is not solitary work. So you're going to need a growth partner or one or more. People who are also on a growth path, who are willing to be honest with themselves and you, and try some things. So it could be a therapist and it could be a friend. And I actually give guidelines in there about how to pick somebody who's more likely to be helpful.
I definitely want to talk about that.
Yeah. So then it is a process. You know, we have to get honest with ourselves, claim some power, make some choices, and then, you know, we practice. So the practice part, how you might be thinking, how do we keep up the motivation to practice? And that is when we notice ourselves acting differently. So instead of saying to my boss, yes, I'm going to work late, I say, well, I would be willing to work late if I could have some comp time next week. So we start noticing ourselves acting differently. It's because it's coming from this center of power, it's a surprising thing. But it also takes continuous action. So one of the techniques that's so simple is when I notice a whispered lie, that I'm not going to be able to figure out this computer program, let's say, and oh, it's going to be horrible. Then it's called the golden key, and it's in a lot of my blogs and stuff, but we notice the thought and then we switch that thought to a negative, more positive thought. So we think about, the way the technique works, you really can say a prayer or visualize some spiritual, or you can think of a flower or a beautiful scene, but it's a scene that centers you in a certain peace and wisdom. So what happens is my mind goes over here, right? Oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to do this. And then I notice that I'm saying that, and I use the golden key to say, well, let me think about something really peaceful, or let me say the serenity prayer. So that's a peaceful thought. Then I'm back to the worry thought, right? Because my mind my mind's default is to protect me by looking out for what's wrong and might come down the path, right? So it's doing its job. I just need to gently say to it, it's okay, that's not going to happen. Let's get peaceful. And the almost magical thing about this technique is that the more we refuse to focus on the problem and the messiness and the disaster and consistently move our mind over to something peaceful and beautiful and inspiring, the thing we were worried about often gets taken care of in a weird way. I mean, not weird, unpleasant, but just in a surprising way because I didn't force it.
Right.
Me, yeah, because I chose to plug into my power and my wisdom and peace rather than let myself stay totally plugged in with my worries.
And that's funny because it's plugging into that. The thing that happened probably couldn't happen until you plugged into that peace. You know what I'm saying? Like, look, if I want to get this done, okay, worrying number one is not going to get me anywhere. It's not going to accomplish a thing. And the more you worry, probably the less it gets done. But when you become focused and letting that go, it happens. And so I'm just thinking, you know, that's what it, in certain situations, that's what it takes to make something happen, to stop worrying about it.
Yeah, bingo. You got it. Yeah, because we can't really get a hold of our best thinking when we're freaked out. Right? And we can't get a hold of our heart and our inspiration and our juice for life when we're freaked out. So we got to figure out ways to get ourselves down into our power and our relaxed state where we can access some wisdom, which is counterintuitive because our culture says bang, bang, bang away at everything. The harder you try, the better it's going to be. But obviously that's not necessarily true, especially in relationships. And in creative endeavors, it certainly isn't.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah. You know, I think here, worry deprives us of clarity.
Yes.
Yeah, it deprives us of clarity. Mm-hmm. You know, you know, in my head, I'm thinking about those light bulb moments. All of a sudden, it becomes crystal clear. But you can't do that when you're overwhelmed with worry.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly true. So if we want to be the best we can be in this world and contribute to others and create amazing things and be loving family members, in a way, we really owe it to ourselves and the world to clear out the worry to the best of our extent. I mean,
unveil. You have to unveil.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. To get yourself clear. And it takes effort because I think we're programmed, and also, you know, the primitive part of the brain is constantly turned on looking for threats, the fight or flight part. Mm-hmm. And so, as I said, it's doing its job, but my job is to let that part of me know that we're not really under threat. Yeah. You know, unless we really are. Obviously, there are things that are worth worrying about, and things worth being afraid of. But I'm talking about when our mind scares us. So then when we notice that, we can say, well, that's my primitive part of the brain. I'm freaked. You know, I had a big argument with someone, and I was just shaking afterwards, you know, and so I was freaked, you know, and I had to go and do breathing exercises and that thing where you think of 3 things you can taste, 2 things you can feel, you know, to get back in my body, to center myself down because my body was shot into fight or flight.
Yeah.
We can't deal with a problem in fight or flight mode. It's the worst place to try to solve things from.
You were really upset.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're okay. Well, look,
yeah.
Let's go go back to those partners or sources of support while one is trying to get over these friends, because I like what you say about watch out for the friends that you choose to help you through this.
Exactly.
Okay, so talk about that. I'm gonna let you talk about that completely. I'm not there enough. I'm not there enough in my notes, but talk about that. Selecting a partner to help you. When I say partner, this could be friend. Of course, they can be a professional, but professionals know what they're doing. Okay, they should be knowing what they're doing, how to say things, how to work with you. But your friends always don't. So let's talk about choosing a friend to help you through this challenge.
Mm-hmm. So there, two ways you can go. I mean, it just takes one other person. Quite often, you want a person who's not going to activate some of your old patterns. So sometimes you think, well, my family member should be a supportive person. But if I grew up and, I kind of revert a little bit when I'm around my family sometimes. Over the years, we've grown and had a lot of wonderful relationships. So I can talk really honestly, thank God. But at the beginning, I was so raw, from the divorces and the alcoholism and all this stuff. My family members had lost all trust and they just wanted to control me. So they're not the best. Then let's look at the lover. We want our lover, right, to be the one that understands us completely and helps me work through everything. Well, especially for a woman, most of us have that lover as a man. And there can be a power play with that, where men are kind of hardwired to try to take care of us and fix things. And so that isn't necessarily helpful. They just tell us what to do. We try it, it doesn't work, then we blame it on them. So, and we didn't gain any capacity ourselves when someone else tells us how to fix it, because I'm trying to develop capacity in myself when my friend isn't there to be able to have access to wisdom. So these friends, if you don't have a friend that is trustworthy and will listen without trying to fix you or without talking about themselves constantly, then a therapist is a good choice, or a counselor, free counseling. But also you can meet people in yoga classes, meditation classes. Those are like-minded people. They're trying to get a handle on life too, and they're going to things that they think will help them. Even some exercise classes, you'll find some people who are interested in personal growth. And the last place is Meetup, the app on the phone.
Yes.
There are Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now. There are groups that study his writings, and or obviously your church or your temple, where there are people who are really trying to grow and trying to become better versions of themselves.
Yeah, and so and speaking of church, I guess this would be you're more likely to find someone in a small group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Our church has a saying, we can't know everybody, but somebody ought to know somebody. So that's why we have these small groups, okay? So that somebody will know about you, And he talks about, we confess, vertically, to God, and then to one another, okay, people, and people need that. Yeah, people need that. Even if they're not warriors, they need that connection with other people to, talk stuff out or listen. Because that's what most people want, right? They don't want you talking. They just want you to listen, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a little section in there I'm listening to.
Yeah. You talk about your friend Mary here, and it says, I encourage Mary to choose a vision for a future life and to use the following growth practices to overcome her whispered lies. So, is this like the vision board? I mean, because we can, if I'm saying to myself, I see myself in the future doing this. Is that what you're talking about here? To vision for a future? But then you have to map it out.
Yeah, I mean, in her case, because she was a spiritual person and had a belief, then I encourage her to pray, but also to say things like, thank you, God, for my happy home and economic freedom. and my healthy children in a happy home. Mary's case was one where, remember, she was in a tiny apartment and wasn't getting any support from her husband, 3 children, and she met a wealthy woman who was in her school district, and she was very embarrassed, and she left coming home, I'm nothing, I can't compete with these people. And so that was part of it was just talking it through and owning what she was believing, the false belief, and then visualizing and praying that her future was rosy and that this wasn't forever.
And when you talk about competing with someone, that takes me back to when life isn't working, it's usually because we're trying to force things to go our way. That also brings to mind when you talk about a little bit about competition. Mary didn't see herself like these other people, so she started judging herself. Okay, and so what if she tried to be like these people? To compete with them. So that's fighting against who she really is.
Yeah, she's just fine the way she is. And that coming to her own power and centering into that is really crucial for that.
Yeah.
So, you were talking about control. And I just wanted to say one more thing about that, which was, and it actually does come up in dysfunctional families where a child might be drinking or using or in jail or whatever, and the parents are comparing themselves to other families and feeling like they're the worst parents in the world, and then trying even harder to control and fix the child. And so when I mentioned groups, the 12-step groups are very, very helpful. And if any person in any loved one that you have is in trouble in any way, it could even be a health problem that they're, because actually addiction is a health problem.
It is.
Going to a group dedicated to learning how to let go of trying to control, but still be a loving presence alongside and available, because it's that delicate dance, we've all heard about enabling and tough love, and those again are not things that we can just invent and figure out ourselves. We need to be in a group of people who've had similar situations and have them share their experience and work through those steps actually that help us what's called detach with love.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Almost like tough love in some situations. You don't want to do it, but you have to do it for the good of everybody or the good of this person. Yeah, that's pretty heavy there. And so we're talking here about connecting with growth-minded people helps you for at least 3 reasons. First, it's easier to be honest with yourself when you're around people who openly share their personal struggles and victories. So I guess that's what we're talking about here. We're getting ahead of my notes here about being in the church or going to yoga. I mean, when you think about yoga, yoga is a form of meditation. Is it?
Yeah.
Because I've never tried it. So you already know these people are seeking peace.
Right.
Just merely by that. So that's a good idea. I've never thought about that. I've meetup groups. I never really thought about that either. Not for anything like this, but you can find that in some amazing places. The sources that you need for that contentment.
Right. Yeah. And I think that when you said how do you stay motivated, it's the group or another person, even a counselor, that's going to help with the motivation and help you notice how you've changed. It is not a solitary job. A person will get discouraged and give up and go back to numbing themselves out with whatever, away from the feelings that are bothering them. I mean, the only way to deal with tough situations is to talk about it, is to be open about it, is to look at how we're dealing with it and help ourselves through it and find others that can help us through it in a healthy way.
Yeah, because it can be, for some it could be a lifelong challenge. Lifelong challenge.
Yep.
And even at that, you just have to keep going.
Pardon?
I said, even at that, you just have to keep going.
Exactly. And trust the process. It is, one of my favorite things that I heard in Al-Anon, which is the organization 12 Steps for people who have loved ones who are using, drinking, whatever, ruining their lives. They're worried about them. So at Al-Anon, one of the greatest, because they talk about you didn't cause it. Okay, the mother with the addicted child didn't cause it. They can't control it and they can't cure it. So part of it is learning to step back and wait and not act, because when we're freaked out, we want to act and fix it. And so one of the sayings was, waiting is an action.
Yeah.
Which is, I thought was so powerful. As long as I'm not just waiting and doing nothing and numbing out. I mean, it's not like I have to be with my feelings 24/7. I can numb out with TV or Ghirardelli chocolate or, but I'm not going to grow if I'm constantly blockading myself from my feelings.
Well, let's talk about, because we talk about finding these friends, or people who can help you. But let's talk about family a little bit, because you tapped on it. You tapped on a little bit about you and your own family. Okay, yeah. And so how when your family sees that you're trying to make a change like this, and they perhaps have been part of the problem, what are people facing with that? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that for a minute, because obviously family is important.
Yeah, very.
Okay, and so you still have your family. You want your family, but at the same time, you really have to get through this. How does that work?
Yeah. It kind of depends on how much you've grossed out your family with your behavior. I mean, if you've been a full-blown alcoholic, drug addict, or in my case, I had, all these divorces. I mean, they were worried about me. And so and when I got into a structured recovery program and therapy, it was kind of they didn't understand it, but they were a little relieved, I think, to know that I was getting help. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things is don't put the family in charge of how well you're doing, but if you haven't completely blown trust in them, which may take years to rebuild, but if you have a decent relationship with them, then to let them know that you're working on, yourself, on becoming more loving and able to receive and give love. So, family can be tricky. And I know in severe cases of alcoholism and drug addiction, the person getting into a recovery program quite often builds their family out of people from those 12-step programs, because those are the people that completely understand and have been there before and know what worked for them. And they heal for a period of months, maybe years, depending, before they are able to reconnect in a healthy way with their family without getting triggered.
Yeah. I understand that, especially because sometimes, even when you're trying to change, and my cousin and I were talking about this not long ago, how sometimes people won't let you change.
Exactly. It's scary for people who love you because they think they know what you should do. And yet recovery and growth involves getting in touch with a very strong center in yourself that's clear and a good orderly direction for you, coming from a truth source rather than whispered lies.
Right. That's a biggie right there. So here you say, let's see. I've only got I didn't get all of this. Comparing myself to others, we talked about that. What happened? What happened?
I can see you.
Wait a minute. What? There I go. Oh, I hit something on the screen. I was like, oh my God, please don't let me use a loser. It said the foundation of much unhappiness is denial, a coping mechanism that allows a person to reject the painful truth too uncomfortable to accept. Denial's voice emphatically whispers, I don't want to admit the truth, and if I did, I just couldn't handle it.
Yep. So the misconception I had was if I delved into some of the pain from my childhood, it would all come rushing back and totally drown me, and I wouldn't be able to recover. And one of the main points of the book is that when we connect, when we get honest, which means we have to look at least something that is bugging us and our part in it, or something that happened, but how we're carrying it forward and it's blocking us, we can connect with a power, a source of power, our own truth, God, the universe. There are a variety of ways, but that is what kind of saves our bacon there. Because if I'm going to get honest and I'm worried that I'm going to get overwhelmed and completely, fall prey to depression or something, then this power, I have to trust that this power is going to support me. So in my case, I had layers of healing, and my positive power regulated those, so that some of the harder to handle things that had happened in my youth, I didn't even know about them until 5 years into my growth process. In other words, those things that needed to be dealt with didn't come up until I was strong enough to handle them.
Right. Oh, wow. Isn't that something? Isn't that something?
So,
yeah. We were talking about that earlier. One thing needs to happen before the other.
Yeah. So, I talk about perfect order. There is this positive power, I call it. I struggled for a term because I didn't want to turn people off by calling it only God. So I invite people to use their own term. It could be higher self, it could be true self. But anyway, there's some source of power that's bigger than our fear self. And so that was my experience, that I could get out of denial. It allowed me to get out of denial and get honest, because I started to learn to trust that I wasn't going to be overwhelmed. Something was going to protect me from crashing and burning completely. But you're right. Getting out of denial is key.
It is, and I've never thought of course, you know what denial is, but I never thought of denial in terms of being afraid of the truth.
Yeah, well,
I mean, because to me, that's what this is saying.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
The truth of my past that I might not know about, that might be accounting for why I'm so screwed up. I mean, in my case, when I was looking at why am I getting divorced, I was terrified. I thought, some awful things had happened and had totally screwed me up. And I was terrified to dig in there and see what that was. And the good news was that I didn't have to learn about it right away. I could get healthier, and eventually, when it was time, get out of denial about that.
Right. Well, I'm thinking too that even for someone that has some inclination of what the truth might be, some awareness, unlike yourself that wasn't aware, they might have some inclination of of the truth that they just don't want to face. I guess that's what I was thinking. Denial in the sense that they're don't want to face the truth.
Yeah. Well, and there's two kinds of truths. There's truth about something that happened that I don't want to look at because I'm afraid of it, but I know it's kind of twisting me a little bit. And then there's the truth about my own behavior in my current life. And, a lot of people don't want, when I was getting divorced, or when I had perfectionism at work and my stress was high, I didn't want to admit to myself that I was overworking. I mean, I was in denial about it. And I was telling myself the whispered lie, if you don't work this much, you won't be better than everybody else. And if you don't, and you've got to be better than everybody else, and so on. So the denial was keeping me from seeing the whispered lies that I was telling myself that were causing all my stress. So in a way, we can deny our own part. I mean, look at alcoholics. They deny for years.
They do.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's multiple denials.
Yeah, and so you just tapped. We just tapped on something. A question I was going to ask you: How can you change your interpretation of events that worry you? One method is to question the truth of your whispered lies.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So you kind of have to do that on the onset. You know, when you hear that lie or
Mm-hmm.
thinking that lie. Yeah,
Yeah.
or it stays there.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason there are 50 different ways of overcoming worry and negative thinking is because there's so many different tools. And one of them that we haven't talked about is called The Work. And it's developed by a woman, and it's all in the book. Byron Katie is her name.
That's next.
And she has this cool, and I give in the book a whole transcript of how I took one of my false lies and used her process. Now, I went to 2 days of training with her to learn how to do it. So it would be difficult to explain quickly,
Right.
but it really does involve saying, if I don't stay late at work, I'll lose my job. Well, is that true? Well, yeah, it's true. Of course it's true. Well, is it really true? Well, I suppose I could do a little less and still keep my job, and then she has you imagine your life without that whispered lie. So if I didn't believe that I was going to lose my job, how would my life be better? How would it be different? Oh, I could be more relaxed. I could be with my family more. I could be, so I'm sort of talking myself into wanting to let go of the whispered lie, and so her process, and then she has these turnarounds that are a little complicated, too complicated to explain here.
Right.
But it's a wonderfully strong tool for reframing a whispered lie and getting free of its hold on you.
Yeah, I'm glad we got that part because, like in my notes, I've got a sentence here, or note there. I keep hitting my screen. I'm so sorry about that. I keep hitting my screen. But with Byron Katie, I got the whole thing. I got the whole paragraph. I'm like, yeah. So this is so true. How you kind of have to back out of it a little bit, and that kind of reminds me when you're talking about you have so many layers. I wanted to ask you then, all these layers that you had, those that you were aware of, did you have to approach them one at a time?
Well, and here's where my self-will, my responsibility is to step up to the growth when I'm noticing that I'm getting in my own way. Okay. So that being said, I'm not in control of the pace of the growth or how it goes, but I did experience that when I stayed in touch with a higher power, a positive power, or my inner wisdom, and I used the techniques to clear out the whispered lies, then I was clearer and I could see more things about myself. So it did happen in layers, but I wasn't responsible for figuring out which layer first, or second, or third.
You weren't controlling that.
What I was controlling was staying honest, staying connected with a source of power, meeting with other people to grow, setting positive expectations or hopes for my life, and then practicing, daily prayer, meditation, whatever tools would help me. Of course, I was in a 12-step program, so I went to meetings. I met with my sponsor, was in therapy. So when we're doing things that keep us honest and growing, we will grow. And I guess the thing to remember is that it's a process and, of course, not then a destination. So if my goal here is to be more loving and able to give and receive love more, then, and I'm asking for that and intending that in my life and willing to do the work, then that means I'm not going to stop growing, I hope. And what gets me to grow? Seeing something that I don't like, or experiencing something like chronic pain for 2 years.
Right.
that got my attention and caused me to want to change, you know? So people say, well, I've worked so hard all these years. Why am I still having trouble? Well, trouble is kind of our motivator for taking a look at ourselves or our relationships or whatever.
Right. Right, right. That's so true. That's so true.
Yes.
For some of us, for some of us, for some of us, it's the motivator. For others, I guess they just never figure it out. They just figure that's the way life is, right?
Right.
Seeing your own words as opportunities to grow. That's what we're talking about now. It's,
Yeah.
oh, not. We just look. We're going. Look.
It was meant to be.
Yeah, I know. It's just naturally
Perfect order.
flowing from this book. And I love that. I love that. So during my tough times, I now try to accept myself exactly as I am at that moment. When I revert to old patterns and fears, I remind myself that growth is gradual, both progress and setbacks. I often imagine myself holding up a sign that says, under construction, pardon my dust. At other times, I repeat to myself, progress, not perfection. Yeah, I need to cut this out, like stick it on my refrigerator.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, so
I
many,
love that.
those are a couple of things. I mean, it's not like 12-step programs own all the clever sayings because they've seeped out into the world, but progress, not perfection. I'm not saying that it came from 12-step programs, but it's often repeated in 12-step programs. So, a lot of the things in the book, even the inventory and the making amends, are illustrated in there through situations in my life. So one of my goals was to bring to people many of these cool techniques and sayings that I've learned, not only through therapy and my own work, but through recovery programs and 12-step programs, because there's a lot of great stuff in there that anybody could use.
It really is. It really is. Well, look, we're coming up on our hour, so I'm gonna, what is it? Tell people what it is about this book. Why should they get this book?
If you want to be more loving and available and relaxed and enjoy the people that you love and your creativity and your work, then you owe it to yourself and those people to learn some ways, because life is always going to make you tense at times. Learn some ways to bring yourself down back to your center of power and love so you can operate from there rather than operating out of impatience, judging, gossip, self-sabotage. Those are not patterns that bring us happiness. So if you really want to be happy and free, you'll work on your own thinking and you'll learn to be nicer to yourself in your head. And as a result, you'll be nicer to everybody else.
Get rid of that committee.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much, Gigi. 50 ways to worry less now. Let's see.
Oh, it just went away.
Oh, it just went off. I'm just
but I'll show you.
Butterfingers today. Yeah, 50 ways to worry less now. Listen, it's been a joy talking with you. I am going to finish this book. I got a great deal of it that I've read. It's one of those books you can't just read one time. I read it because we were going to do this interview, but I'm going to read it again totally for my self-improvement, to get rid of the committee in my head and all that stuff. So I want to again say thank you for joining me today. My name is
Thank you.
Author and host of About the Book, both on radio and Zoom. If you're watching this and you are an author, would like to interview, you can contact me, reach out to me at Renew Refresh Reset at gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, Sharita Hughley Cadenhead. And Gigi, tell us where they can find your book. Where can they find your book?
Where you can find it, it's on Amazon, and there's a 20% coupon on my website, gigilanger.com, G-I-G-I Langer.com. And it's available in ebook formats. I'm working on an audio book and hope to have that ready by June or July. You can buy it anywhere, and it's getting really good reviews, which I'm so grateful for.
Yeah, yeah. And so look, let me know when that audio version is
I will.
available. I think we talked of, the first time we talked, I said I didn't usually do well with audio because I get so distracted. So your book is probably gonna be the first attempt in a very long time
Yes,
to
well,
listen to an audiobook. So I'm gonna be waiting for that. In the meantime, have a wonderful, wonderful Sunday. It has been a
thank you.
pleasure talking with you.
It's been wonderful talking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
All right, you're welcome. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.